Albert, the floor is yours, and maybe to say also a few words about you and your activity. So you grow up in Kosovo. You have an important experience of real antagonism through the experience of Kosovo War. And you have been educated in art also in a moment, in a very crucial moment, that was this moment of the pre and the war and after the war. That I think is a very, in your way you speak about this, is a very important thing. Also how the Art Academy was being done in private apartments in this time. So you have also a very different experience of an art school that made of you an artist who is very active in antagonistic political subjects, in very concrete interventions on public space. That is really the place where your work has developed mainly. On also thinking your actions, beginning with really confronting yourself with what is communication, what are the place where communication goes through, and what is this communication, how it works with radical, violent political issues that are very often in the center of your own artistic work. That brought you also with Vala Osmani, a designer and architect, to found the art center in Pristhina, Stacion, now 15 years, 17 years ago, something like that.
I don't count the years.
You don't count, it's okay. Fine. Yeah. And so it's a long experience that brought you now 5 or 7 years ago to found also this summer school that is a very interesting teaching program for people coming from everywhere, placed in Pristina 2 weeks in the summer. The next summer school next year will be August 8 to August 2021. So,
I mean, it's. I think it's an important discussion, but I would not necessarily agree how you see
your work,
the field, and what art can do and should not do, and what we cannot touch, and what I think everything should be open for, also for interpretation.
Because I said there's something that we cannot touch.
Yeah, you said you somehow cornered the arts, or maybe even the art school, somewhere isolated from the other
I don't so
happenings in a way. But let me just go back.
I will answer after.
Yes. But
do you want to use?
I will just start and then I can.
Okay.
But let me just see if it's there. But just to answer to your question, I mean, I didn't know initially that I would study art. I didn't know initially that I would study art. Basically, I grew up in times when I knew what my country was. I knew also what my identity was, and I thought that my identity as a Kosovar Albanian was an integral part of the Yugoslav state as such. So former Yugoslavia is still in some circles considered as an emancipatory project of nations who lived in that area. Today, that reality is totally eclipsed. It doesn't exist. Today, even the political reality of the time is replaced by the notion of the Balkans. But it's interesting because Olivier Marchard mentions Heidegger, and he says somehow in order to be agitated only when you're agitated you can agitate, or in a way this process only occurs if you are thrown in a political conflictual situation. So us as a country, citizens, artists, everyone, we were thrown into a political situation. It was not a choice to be let's say less or more political in your work. It was happening in front of my TV, basically when the country fell apart. I was 14, 15 at that time. But then, with the education that we were offered in that political system, there were some notions which were critical, and there were some directions which were quite clear. And one of them was, I remember I was quite young, it's like no nation can forever be occupied. Very basic. So, but then political struggle is important, conflict, confrontation, and these notions. And it's interesting because even in the Second World War, in a way, self-determination of nations in the former Yugoslavia was given with one sort of precondition by the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. So those nations would have to fight fascism. So you would have self-determination if you fight fascism. So there was some conditions given. And I'm mentioning this, and I normally I would think that this is not something that you can condition, but I think even as an art activity in an occupation, this meant a lot. What you can, how you can remain active in this situation. And I think remaining active, or even sometimes even exercising political activity in a field, even in this field, is relevant and up for discussion. And you mentioned this when you talk about pause in your presentation. Like when the actual political activity is not an option, do you pause, and how do you pause, and what that means? But this idea that when you're thrown into a political situation, how you react, I think for me it's also important. Do you divert, or do you confront that situation? And what are the tools, and how? What is the thought? And can you think? Are we able to think in this context? That maybe is important to mention. And the art world at that time was, clearly in relation to the context, was quite underdeveloped, quite academic, not concerned more with the issues of identity, and it seemed like modernity never achieved or reached that context fully, in terms of the individual being, let's say, more dominant active function. Rather, it was still in a collective mode of functioning, which, if you read Marchart, he prefers the collective action instead of individual action, and we as artists are more or less trained to be individuals, more than collectives. But of course there's group work, of course, but somehow, and he qualifies this as an element of the capitalist system and mentality, basically. So at that time, going in school meant changing what public sphere was. Private was changed into public, because the public was occupied and made accessible by the majority. So let's say 93% of the population were Albanian-speaking Kosovars, who did not have access anymore to the public institutions, and this lasted for 10 years. So it was not like a brief blitzkrieg or anything similar, not similar to what was happening in Bosnia, But for 10 years, these two sides were separated, not having any discussion. And then the war happened, basically. But still, if in my research I also look at this possibility of dialogue and confrontation, and it is not strange, but it's interesting to observe how for more than 30 years young people in this country didn't have so much the opportunity to confront each other's ideas. And I'm talking about this ontological possibility, not the ontic confrontations. So they are being kept apart as the only means to secure stability or any other condition which excludes also negativity. It excludes any antagonism in that context. And precisely, this is for me very interesting to as a space for research where art or could art create this space for antagonism in those conditions where no other field is functioning. So politics cannot create this space for certain reasons and conditions where art is placed in this context. And for me, it's interesting when I find thought that gives some space for art to have a role in these conditions. So, and then this is where I try then to maybe to research and read deeper to understand what are these possibilities and in what shape and form can they manifest itself. Maybe I'll jump to my presentation briefly, and I can show a bit more. Okay, so because we are in this context, I decided to show a case of an artist's intervention in the Kosovar context. This is one of the cases in my study. In this current research, as I said, I'm observing these cases of art interventions as possible spaces to allow antagonism, which can link everyday practices of artists to the broader economic and political forces shaping this specific Kosovo context. And maybe just to have some broad information about this context, I mean, the current sociopolitical condition in Kosovo showcase a state and a society in contested formation. So it's challenged both from the inside and the outside. And more recently by a populist political movement grown to become a dominant party system. And this is quite important for reading of antagonism. This this political movement is the so-called self-determination movement in Albanian Vetëvendosje. And I mentioned briefly self-determination in relation to the Second World War and anti-fascist struggle. As a term, it is very strong in the Kosovar context. So how it is called, the movement is relevant for the analysis. This movement appeals more to young people, or initially it appealed more to young people. But it operated with populist power politics, which resulted in exclusionary attitudes and practices toward Kosovo's ethnic minorities and vulnerable groups. It also restored the Albanian hegemonic narrative, which can erode the genealogy of the Kosovar statehood, in a way, because it is challenging the statehood as it is perceived. Maybe just to mention how this tendency became evident in late 2019, when the leader of this movement, Albin Kurti, soon after the prime minister, uttered words, "There's no such thing as the Kosovar nation." So there's this conflicting debate about what a nation is in the Kosovar context, because the challenge that Kosovar Albanians had for a long time was they were trying to preserve their Albanian identity, but when the request was put forward for a new state, very few were thinking that this would mean a new nation. So, which disrupted also this romantic dream of the Albanian nation, which includes all Albanians living in this region. But when a politician with this performative power utters these words, it's basically to his followers is a political program to follow. It's not only his opinion. And we were seeing this evolving. Previously, he also had said our republic can move forward only with the Albanian flag. So Kosovo, when it declared the flag, the nation state or the state, it also adopted a flag which was different from the Albanian flag and the Serbian flag. But the discourse, as I said, with performative power, also could be read as another call to abolish the idealist or this utopian process for creating an inclusive new society in Kosovo. Furthermore, in 2021, in times of the pandemic, he declared there's no more plurality of political parties in Kosovo, so obliterating also the necessity for having political antagonism. Instead, he said elections are a referendum to confirm that we are a majority in the parliament as we are the majority of the population. So he basically claimed to be everything in that context. In an early election held amid the coronavirus pandemic, Vetëvendosje grew substantially and now controls all, let's say, all elements of power. So the parliament, the presidency, the government. And seemingly obliterating the space for democratic antagonism and the political. As I said even before, Laclau and Mouffe argue that without antagonism, without the space for confronting each other's arguments, there's only the imposed consensus of authoritarian order. This movement was, or the way how it's led, is not difficult to be qualified as authoritarian. One can find online a lecture titled "Populism as a Disavowal of Social Antagonism" by Slavoj Žižek. It's an interesting lecture And it's more interesting because Žižek and few other thinkers openly have supported this movement. I don't know their reading of it, what it is, but it's relevant to place it in this context. Mouffe has said a well-functioning democracy calls for a confrontation of democratic political positions, whilst to place the discussion in the art context, Claire Bishop, an art historian and critic, suggests antagonism does not signal the expulsion of utopia from the field of the political. What is more, for Bishop, a democratic society is one in which relations of conflict are sustained, not erased. However, and this is important maybe for the French context and maybe for the discussion that we had previously, Nicolas Bourriaud, a curator and art critic who introduced the notion of relational aesthetics or the human relations as a point of departure in art, had said art no longer tries to represent utopias or create space for conflict. It is merely trying to construct concrete spaces to invent possible relations with neighbors in the present rather than bet on happier tomorrows. And I think it's important also in the current context, you know, what this means, these possible relations with neighbors in the present, rather than try to construct or bet on a happier tomorrow. I mentioned this, but in contrast to this position, Olivier Marchard has seen in art room for these rehearsals, artistic rehearsals, test cases, or how he calls them pre-enactments of political situations. So in the art discourse, we can come across a lot about the notion of reenactment. He goes further and introduces the notion of pre-enactment of political situations. And the difference is where reenactments have an end goal, an end result, because they merely reenact, let's say, a performance that was, or a work which was performed at an earlier stage. Pre-enactments have no concrete goal, so they can be anything and anywhere and going in any direction. He also posits the emergence of antagonism to turn the artist's position into a political position. This is, for me, important for discussion. But then the theory of antagonism is understood as an ontological condition and a name for intrinsically political nature of the social being and the name for the political. In this case, demarcated from but related to the ontic notion of politics. So there are two notions here. It's the political and politics, which are not one of the same. And ontic conflicts, real conflicts, are conflicts of war that we are seeing, whereas political ontology is in another level also of argumentation. Mouffe also engaged more recently with the political role of art, and this could be further, let me just further discuss. And I forgot to bring here an important element of this presentation, because initially I was thinking that we would be able just to read together some parts of this book, and I recommend it also for the sake of confronting the book itself. So, Conflictual Aesthetics, Artistic Activism in the Public Sphere. And to go back to the Kosovo context, I decided to show, as I said, an artist intervention by an artist organized in January 2018 just a few weeks before the 10th anniversary of the independence of Kosovo. What that meant, in a seemingly politically naive intervention, with a playful approach, a young conceptual artist, Driton Selmani, removed the visually dominant national flag of Albania from the landmark flagpole in Pristina, so in the entrance of the city, and replaced it with a large 6x4 meter red and yellow checkered flag used to signal foul play in football. In football, a foul play is an unfair act by a player deemed by the referee to contravene the game's laws that interferes with the active play of the game. After the intervention, in less than 30 minutes, the Kosovo police apprehended the artist with the media present. Furthermore, the artist was kept at the police station until he agreed to reinstate the flag of Albania at the flagpole. To show the approach of the artist, I translated quickly his request that was submitted to the municipality of Pristina, and these are the first few lines of the request. In legal terms, grounds for the incarceration of the artist and subsequent action of the police demanding the artist to reinstate the flag of Albania remain unclear, because this is just not a legal role that the police has. I mean, the police could, let's say...
Excuse me, to clear for everyone.
Yes.
You're talking about the flag of Albania.
I'm going to clear it up, yes.
Yeah. For us not
yes.
to that clear the
yes,
borders.
Yes. So in this case, this is the Kosovo police, and the artist removed the flag of Albania. He didn't remove the flag of Kosovo. And the actions of the police, as I said, remain unclear, but still these actions revealed a rupture in the existing system in the Republic of Kosovo. The artist did not contradict the police. So they said to him, reinstate the flag. He reinstated the flag. Normally, you would expect for artists with political stature to say no, like to confront the police. He didn't confront the police. So they asked him, reinstate the flag. He called his team, because it was a large team, large intervention. He reinstated the flag. Just briefly to go to an image. Okay, this is the flag, and his flag, and just to show the magnitude of the operation. So he had employed a large crane in order to replace the flag, and it was a complex operation, not a very simple operation. The artist was not charged or prosecuted for removing the Albanian national flag. The artist was merely fined by the municipality for ruining the grass in the public ground when using a heavy, large crane. So they could not find, they incarcerated the artist, they arrested, they were holding him. Actually, in a way, they kidnapped the artist, but they could not prosecute him. The only way and it's interesting because the police was, let's say, at that time officially not controlled by this political party. This was 2018, prior to them dominating the system. But still, the police acted in this way. The artists seem to have planned the intervention as an organized and strategic activity. I'm referring here to some conditions necessary mentioned by Marchard. He was agitated into activism by personal situation, he mentions this. We had a presentation during the summer school, and he mentions this personal situation. Still, the intervention can be viewed as an individual or individualistic activity or an artist's contribution to a collective experiment with an activist practice. At the same time, in my view, the intervention introduced a counter-hegemony and was confronting emotions and the state apparatus in the utopian process of multi-ethnic social formation. For the art context of this conference, it's relevant that the artist's intervention strategy included the public habitus of the artist, known for his playful approach. So he was easily recognized who he was. And it's important to mention also the position of the prominent leaders of self-determination movement, which posit that art is not dangerous. So we had a conference in 2007, and because they used a lot of seemingly political aesthetics that art also uses, in the conference themselves, they said when someone compared them to artistic performances, they said, no, I mean, we are more dangerous. Like, we are not in the art field, we are in the political field. When analyzing this political habitus of the artist, in this case, perhaps pre-enacting antagonism or prefigurative activists, as Marchard would name them, he says they never move in straight lines toward a defined goal. They move in staggering, tottering ways on non-circular lines toward the obfuscated, obscure, unclear goal. Sometimes their action may appear clumsy and ridiculously naive. He says it's part of the nature of political acting, which is closer to slapstick comedy and military than military discipline because of its underground and open-ended character. For this reason, an aesthetic or conflictual practice might have more to do with the aesthetics of slapstick and less with the aesthetics of high art. And I think this quote is important for our context. He adds, its main object of concern is the street, including banana peels, rather than artwork on a gallery wall. Let's go back to the request, just briefly. So, dear director, I'm requesting the permission to record in the location known as the roundabout of the flag, neighborhood Ulpiana, on 27th of 1st, 2018. For the occasion, I will execute the artistic performance starting from 07 to 900 in the morning. The artistic performance, halfway to nowhere, includes the revealing of a banner in the mentioned location. For this occasion, as an assisting tool in documenting the performance, I have secured a motoric crane, and this is a translation staying very close to the original request, which is necessary to hoist the banner. He added flag, and for the implementation of the performance. For the sake of mobility, the crane will need to use one of the traffic lanes in the roundabout for the functioning of the entire process. P.S. The request is submitted once again. As in the first attempt last week, the performance was rendered impossible from the weather conditions in Pristhina. So he attempted twice to do the performance itself. But you could also see that there's some sort of understanding or communication with the municipality. So it's not a subversive action which is completely underground and then gets out in some form or shape how Marchard would define. Our artist, as I said, was indeed asking and getting permission to record the performance from city authorities with an obscure and vague description. Even mentioning performance in a request to the municipality is could be seen as obscure and vague. However, the artist was organized. He had organized the intervention well. That meant also using a large crane, not only for the sake of the intervention, but also to maximize the imagery. Important for high art in this case. So the images were spectacular of the intervention itself. In this case, the critique of Marchard is like he would describe this action also as dogmatically individualistic, thus making the pre-enactment merely an advancement of the artistic career. You know, if it doesn't go in one direction, where does it go? In legal terms, to go back to the context, the artist removed the flag of another state. When adopted in 2008, state symbols of the Republic of Kosovo were, as foreseen by a political process, a so-called Altisari plan, which saw these symbols as not the same or similar to national symbols of other states, which meant that the Albanian and Serbian two-headed eagle and the use of the color combination red, black, it was very specific. You cannot use this symbol, you cannot use these colors, red, black, or blue, white, red of the Serbian flag. So red, black of the Albanian flag or blue, white, red of the Serbian flag were not allowed. The plan itself provided, so the Altisari plan provided the following proposal. Kosovo shall have its own distinct national symbols, including a flag, seal, and anthem, reflecting its multi-ethnic character. However, in reality, this process only temporarily subdued the fear of replacements of existing ethno-national symbols, perceived by both ethnic communities in Kosovo as a national betrayal. So that's also why it's relevant for me to analyze this intervention, because he entered in a very conflictual space by intervening in this poll, yet with this naive approach. The intervention seemingly touched a sacred item for many. Following news about the intervention, the mayor of Pristina, which belonged to the same political party, the Vedvendosje movement, posted on social media how he and the city administration were calmed only after understanding that this was not some foreign power diversion, but only an artist's intervention. So it's okay. It's art. Extended in time and historical context, with his intervention, the artist replicated and reenacted another subversive, covert intervention at the same site in November 2013. So this site was endured multiple interventions. But I still leave room that his intervention could mean that he pre-enacted the artistic anticipation of a political to come. Back in 2013, it was the Kosovo national flag, which you see here, worn by Rita Ora, a British Kosovan pop singer. Back then, this flag was removed from the same flagpole by a member of this political movement. They removed the flag in the day of the National Flag Day of Albania and replaced it with the Albanian flag. At that time, Pristina had this same mayor who became afraid in 2018. At the same time, the Kosovo police did not show up to protect the Kosovo flag then. The flag of Albania is still there, and it's there to stay, effectively undermining Kosovo's statehood in the capital of Kosovo. This movement was once an NGO, later a protest group, and Albanian flags are somehow the norm of this political reality now in Kosovo, which is dominant in the political sphere. I mean, just by briefly reading this context, the flag was used to eclipse the Kosovo national flag representing all communities. Still, even when, according to the current constitution, removing of the flag is considered illegal, the member of the ruling party who had removed the flag in 2013 was only arrested in 2016, 3 years after. Nevertheless, charges were later dropped. The flag of Albania, converted in the flag of the political party, was still there to stay. There was another event in the same flagpole a few weeks after, in 2018, when the government itself replaced the Albanian flag with the Kosovo flag to commemorate the 10th anniversary of independence. In this case, special units of the police were present to assist with the removal of the flag. So it was an interesting intervention of an artist within a larger movement, and it's still not clear if one resulted the other or it merely coincided with the other, which is a point for further research. When addressing this action, why special police units are necessary to replace the flag, and then the Prime Minister of Kosovo, another Prime Minister, Ramush Haradinaj, said there are no Albanians which do not respect the national flag, meaning the national flag of Albania. I appeal, so he addressed to Kosovars as Albanians, I appeal to you to have an attitude of respect and constructivism in these festive days. The 19th will come, a day after will come, and we will return to our own flags. So we just have to hoist this flag for I don't know what, but then we will return to our usual flag. When thinking through the intervention, the usage of flags and the relations of symbolic power communicated through flags, culture, and sports seems to be the common denominators for many young people in Kosovo, including the north of Kosovo. And the north is important because in the north you have the Serbian flag. And when the Kosovo flag was replaced with the Albanian flag in Kosovo, all of a sudden the Kosovo Serb citizens felt somehow that they were right to use another flag. About the position of the artist. While the art intervention in Pristina was being organized, the artist disseminated a statement for the press, so he was well organized, saying, flags have always been used by people and societies to shape identities. They create a sense of fellowship, build hope and optimism. You could ask what was the goal here, maybe, but also maybe it's important to discuss how contemporary art interventions can constitute a counter-hegemony in terms of the image that he introduced in the public sphere, and if this other image can accelerate social interaction and enable a radical political imaginary beyond the established systemic divisions. This in direct relation to the context. At the end of the statement, he argued the flag which he installed questions the surrounding reality and describes best the political, economic, and social situation. It is the flag of despair, he said, feeling of exclusion, the lack of pride in the state, its institutions, and state symbols. At the same time, so this is this roundabout with the Albanian flag, which is still there. At the same time, the leader of this movement, he continued to communicate visually with flags during his time in power. He became the first Kosovan politician who introduced another flag or another hegemony in the cabinet of the Prime Minister of Kosovo. For the first time, the institution communicated with Kosovan citizens with another flag in the background of the Prime Minister's office, in a way waiving the restored symbolic power. During his time in office, the first term, the flag of Albania would appear or disappear in the background in variations, depending on the event, media, delegation, or language. I just included 2 images where you can see the Albanian flag in the office of the Prime Minister. This never happened before. So the state until then was always communicating with the Kosovar flag. This image here includes the original request put forward to the municipality, and it's handwritten. And it's very interesting how it really looks naive and nothing serious. Maybe to conclude with how I started and how we are thrown in a political conflictual situation, and maybe this is also the case of this intervention. Marchard in Conflictual Aesthetics says we have to be agitated in order to agitate. He says any other position would amount to a voluntaristic misunderstanding of the nature of the political subjectivity. Therefore, as long as the situation is not experienced as antagonistic, as long as we are not touched by a real antagonism, every enactment of the political will be of the order of a pre-enactment. With regard to the actual emergence of the political, it will come too early. It will thus be only the anticipation of the political, rather than its direct enactment. In this sense, he continues, a political pre-enactment can occur in every field of the social, including the art field. Art practice or art practices in an entirely experimental way may therefore pre-enact political ones, even though they will never be fully identical with political practices because they would cease to be art. However, he says, if we wish to increase the chances of artistic practice turning into political practice in the moment of a future conflict, artists would well be advised not to imprison themselves within the spontaneous ideology of the art field. And maybe this is important also for our context. This means to act as it were in a political mode, even though the moment of the political may not have occurred yet, in a way. It's mine, I guess. Okay, I will end here. Thank you. Thank you. A phone call in the right moment.
We're very happy.
No.
Huh? Pardon? Sauvé. I'm very happy, Albert, you spoke about this work of Driton Salmani, because I showed this, but our exhibition in 2019, it was a starting point of our work, this work of Driton. So it is interesting that you come back on this, for us also very much. I'm very interested in your approach about this question of naivety. That brings, it seems to me, also an important point in the argumentation of Marchard. Is a point that makes it open up in a direction I don't think Marchard has seen in his own approach. What do you think about this question of naivety? Do you think it is a political position?
I think it can be a political position. It can be. I mean, normally I would be inclined thinking that strategies are always important. How you approach a certain condition or a certain conflict, and I think as a strategy, it is a viable approach. In this case, the artist only looks to be naive, but also he chooses to be naive in many ways. And he would rather be happy if someone else becomes political with his work, right? So he offers a space for us to be political, or to create the conflict which he on his own cannot sustain, right? But he threw an intervention to our context, even though it was short durational. It has limited presence. Even in the request itself, it says from 7 to 9. So it's nothing permanent, right? So it's ephemeral. But when you read my chart, he also gives this idea that, and I think this should be open for further debate and question, the limitation that high art has in this discussion, which I don't necessarily agree. So because like his intervention has all the elements of one side of his view, but also it includes the other. And also this idea that only one individual cannot do everything, not to call it, cannot enact antagonism. And as I said, I mean, I think one individual can do a lot. I don't know, just to be blunt.
Yes, no, I'm thinking about naivety because I had written in my courses. So I worked also outside his artistic work, and he is really using naivety as at the time I had the impression it was really a question of what I would say of shape, so that it is this real consistent part of what it means to produce in his approach. And then 2 years later, now in 2019 maybe, I don't remember, he made a conference in Stacion, and it was a very public situation, politically charged. So it was clearly a strong moment for him to present the piece in a conference, in a discussion more than in a conference. So he presented a little bit, but it was a format of discussion. And then I had the impression in the second moment that this naivety, it was also a political way to protect oneself, so never to affirm that the action is political. So there is something that I have the impression is the naivety, where naivety is a tool of the work, real tool of the work, of the choices, how he chooses how to work, and then in a second moment becomes a dialectical element in public space, where he never entered the space of antagonism. So this was the second, 1 year later.
Or space of confrontation.
Of confrontation,
yes.
More, yes.
But he himself did not. But the work itself
does.
Yes.
So that seems to me a very important skip to Marshall's position, because there could be a difference in how you present yourself in public space, and how you use the tools of antagonism, and how you use it in this different way that is a kind of step by side, never entering the field, by discussing the field only through the work. So maybe you see it differently from Kosovar conditions, but
no, it's an impossible position. It's an impossible position because I mean I think also it shows his limitations as well. because I think he would function in a different way if the social structures in a given situation would be more organized. You know, if the artist would be part of a larger collective in a way, when he would be more, let's say, also protected, I think he would function in a different way. I presume. I'm just throwing this. But as he functions, and all of us in a way function quite isolated as individuals, then we adapt strategies which seemingly reduce our possibilities to confront, as political subjects, to confront or enter into a conflict with a situation which agitates us, let's say, directly. So then he knows his abilities, I think, and his limitations, and he chooses this. In this case, he chooses this.
So you see it more as a strategic.
I think it's a very pragmatic approach. It doesn't look critical. It looks very pragmatic in a way. But I think still it's a political move. It's very difficult to remove it, because the work is in the public sphere. It is in a contested public sphere, and there's no way. But there's no way not to be as such. But then the reading of what it was and what it is depends on who is actually reading it. You know, are those who are close to, as Marchard labels them, functionaries of the art field, or are those who would see this work as a certain projection or certain imaginary of a future situation to come. So it's then to us who read it how we define it, and what is the place that we give to such an intervention, I think, because it's not only him. I mean, there are, of course, views that the artist should provide the critique for the artwork itself, and he should somehow, or she, create this situation. But in this case, he adapted a different strategy. But this is the same strategy for many other works, but which are not of this magnitude, in a way, to call it like this. And this is an exception also in his practice.
Also, it's his practice.
I think it's an exception, but it's also interesting to understand why he was, or how was he agitated. And I mentioned this personal issue. You know, like for instance, if you have a child and the child is having problems with or difficulties breathing the air in a city heavily polluted.
This is an argument
heavily polluted.
He brings,
yes, he brings this very personal argument, heavily polluted, and then where do you turn to see the problem? What is the problem? And then he says, "This is the problem." And but then he, in a way, he actively engages with the situation, and then of course he tries to find some sense of protection. That's why also when police apprehend him, he's very cooperative. You know, he doesn't carry this this coat of an activist. No, he's just an artist. You know, he's this innocent artist who just did this small work. You know, he didn't do anything. So,
other question from the.
Do you think it can define something like a particular space which is which would exist between polarization of, let's say, something where activism is really dangerous and you risk too much, or you can go to Gulag or anything because, like Pussy Riot, you made a concert inside a church and it's really dangerous on one hand, and on the other there is those places of high culture, to take Hegelian term, maybe something. Maybe there is self-digestion or something really close on itself or half close or on itself, and we can find a space in between where something, an exchange is possible, and this space, can it be maintained or just crossed for a little while, or what is its special or even a temporal nature? This is what you're trying to define?
I think the school is one of these spaces.
Yes.
I think any space can be this space that you call in between, or the space toward something else. But I think building this idea of solidarity and collective action is also very important. You know, this understanding among more people how to constitute this space, because the space is constituted always. It is not there. So you create the space. In this case, he acted alone. So he did not alone. He's very close to the media, as all, let's say, more popular artists today are. So he has friends in media. Media were there when he was arrested. So it was not unexpected, maybe. So he creates these alliances all the time, you know. Whether there are other artists, art institutions or not, but he is not an individual which is completely detached from the system. Even how, if you deconstruct the communication with the municipality, you see that he's an insider. He's not some outsider who is just... So there was another attempt, there was a communication, there were discussions inside. It's maybe relevant to mention how in our legal system, the mayor of the city has this complete authority. So other workers in the municipality are just his advisors. So the law for self-management of local authority concentrates power in one single person. Actually, it's quite dangerous, but I think in this case the mayor did not have the information about this intervention at all. That's why when he goes in public, and his political party was expecting that they would protect this site, you know, because this was the first municipality that they got. So they first got the capital, and this was the sacred site, you know, for them. This is where everything started from. So the critique was how they did not protect this. And normally it's difficult because it's not protected by law. So it's protected by other means. And for me, these other means are interesting to explore, relevant to explore. And but in this case, it also shows how it is impossible to concentrate only all power in only one person, even if the law requires this, especially in these issues of a public interest. And so in this case, I think the mayor was bypassed by some structures within the, it's called the Directorate for Culture in the municipality. So the artist, let's say, used dialogue, different strategies to achieve his aims, his goals. For me, it's interesting also to discuss this idea: what were his goals? You know, so what were his goals?
But there is a second, for me, another element that I think very interesting in what you're saying now. This is, as you spoke about Riton Salmani, as someone who is insider. This is also in society he belongs. His father had invented something for painting, so that he became a chemist. That it has also some economic possibilities. And for me, this is
financial security, you know.
A financial security and a social security that goes with the financial security. And I think this is a very interesting point for me, not to criticize this in this typical Occidental approach of being engaged is also to be engaged in the production economy, because Driton Salmani used an economy for this intervention that it's expensive. It's expensive to do it twice. but he'd use exactly the economics that are used in public space in the city itself, where you put private money to build buildings before it becomes publicly allowed to have your building. So he uses all these neoliberal means exactly in the production of its piece, and he never spoke about that. And in the conference of 2019, he didn't answer this question. He didn't answer all these elements of the production of the work. So that the private money, his own private money, he is used in the same way in Pristina used private money to get public space and to get public power. So I think there is also an element of a political, it seems to me that there is a political use of the term power in a critical way that doesn't appear in the first step as being critical. No, I don't know if you agree, but that is, if my view is the right one.
I mean, there are many cases where these critical practices were supported by successful, financially successful individuals and families, and this is not the only one. In many ways, I mean, not to compare, financial stability and security is very important for any practice, I think. I mean, it's the not especially for the art field, but in this case, he didn't have the burden of financial, also financial consequences, right? Because this, it's not a practice which, or the critical reading of this practice is not something that is preferred by the art field, and more or less in a normalized Eurocentric view, which dominates museums and gallery systems and similar, but functioning in a context without an art market, without an established art market as a practice, shows that there are some advantages as well. So, and these are one of those cases where pressure or agitation that is coming toward you can produce a conflict and can produce a response which then can incite others to engage with the given situation. I mean, but in addition maybe to what I showed, actually when the Kosovo flag was replaced in 2013, there was a lot of pressure to reinstate the flag. So social media, I personally was engaged in writing about it daily, and other political activists and whatever. So it was not, maybe the artist himself, he never wrote about it, anything. And this is also interesting to explore. There's also a view that the intervention itself maybe created conditions which enables the continuity of the Albanian flag in the given situation. So normally, and I was thinking, what would happen if you would use the Kosovar flag, right? If you would just reinstate the Kosovar flag. And normally many citizens would expect this to be an action, right? So just if state is missing, and if no one is exercising their duty, someone should just go and reinstate the flag, right? But I think by introducing a counter image, in a way, he opened up the field more. But in terms of the real situation, I think the Albanian flag is there to stay now. This is because of the conflict that he produced through the artwork itself. You know, it was, but of course the future will show. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right. Yes, Sami?
I have two questions. One would be
Sami, the microphone, please.
Remark. The let's say strategic use of certain naivete towards local authorities makes totally sense, because you can, of course, sell this product, art commodity, twice. One is a naive intervention of a law-obeying citizen who is well connected and uses the same means of production, let's say, the political economy of doing things in one of, let's say, more the fringe sides of European Balkan-style neoliberal developer capitalism, and to an international art market where, of course, precisely this naivete and the mimicry of doing it in terms of political economy of the production can have a kind of subversive surplus value precisely for mimicking exactly what it criticizes. Completely fine. I don't see the problem here. The problem would be another one when you brought in Marciar's argument how to be agitated by the real antagonism. You know, if you're not agitated, you are also not in the field of antagonism. The problem, of course, with antagonism is precisely that of, surprise egg. Once you have opened or more of these kind of Russian figures, how do you call these dolls? These,
Yes.
Matryoshka, yeah. The moment you point at the antagonism in the field of ideology, it is of course identity of Kosovo. Is it actually Albanian terms of majority, culture, language, and so on, or is it more, let's say, artificial, politically correct edifice of the state of Kosovo, which should be multi-ethnic and multi-religious and so on? That's on the level of antagonism of political official discourse. But as you already said, I cannot breathe the air. What is the real antagonism of Kosovo? Of course, precisely of Western South Balkan being economic, neoliberal dumpland, wasteland of European, let's say, German, French capitalism, where they need just, let's be blunt, kind of people for surplus labor market that they can get, extract certain intellectual labor they don't have to produce here, doctors and so on and so on. So the real antagonism is precisely not what ridiculous flag is on a flag post. It is not what people think. So the point of antagonism here is misleading. It is, or put it this way, it is a structure of referral and of displacement. The moment I crack it open and say, here is the antagonism, I have another antagonism. And this is for me actually the problem of the whole, sorry to be a bit mean towards the theoretical framework that is offered in the book. Antagonism here doesn't offer me a further critical analytic insight of the nature of the very antagonism, because displacement, of course you would say this is a classic Marxist point, the moment you break through the circulation sphere of the market, you break through the sphere of political representation, you enter another, I'm not saying the original, but you enter another antagonism. It's not only the political economic, because the political economic is immediately framed through ethnic makeup of state, non-state. Of course, you know, the example clearly given here is Lebanon, where you have sectarian capitalism plus financial capitalism plus kind of neo-feudal ways of belonging. These other antagonisms that work in the political sphere, let's say, are codependent on, you know, it is kind of a chain of antagonisms. And the individual disavow of not being in one antagonism. They say, no, I didn't know about the meaning of the flag. Let's be naive, you know. I thought this is your national flag. Ah, yeah, really is it? Oh, how interesting, you know. It's kind of strategic naivete here is just the opening door to another antagonism. That's why I'm just curious about what is then the analytic surplus of calling it antagonism when I'm anyways in the moment I'm doing a public intervention here in the field of antagonism. But what is the real antagonism is not answered by that.
First of all, he never claims that he did an antagonistic intervention. Yes, no, the space itself. But like if you read, if you hear him how he describes it, he's completely not political in any way. You know, so this is just. But like, I mean, even this statement maybe is an exaggeration. But you could also say that his intervention points out to an ontological presence, if the flag could be pushed into that dimension, and he doesn't necessarily deal with these ontic or real antagonisms, as you say, the air, for instance. But you have to remember, he doesn't install, and this was something that was happening in the meantime, he does not install a machine that would calculate the quality of the air for his child. And why doesn't he do that? And he goes and he removes the flag. And at the same time, there were NGOs installing, the American embassy was installing these, so he asks for a machinery to be able to remove the flag, right? Because I think this ontological presence of this hegemony, and he says clearly that that's the problem. I mean, in his own words. I'm not saying. So why he makes this connection is interesting, right? Because like he doesn't necessarily respond to it in how we would expect it. Let's say this is the challenge, and then I try to cure that problem with an intervention. In terms of why I find the political theory of antagonism relevant for our context and also relevant for our time, is also the notion of the democratic conflict. So the possibility of contradiction and conflict, and I think in our case, in our society, conflict is being prevented by liberal approaches. So conflict as such has been pushed aside. So there is no possibility for democratic conflict. For instance, the representatives of the Serbian political parties, they never enter in a political conflict in the parliament. So the parliament is not space for conflict anymore. So there's no political in the parliament, and without conflict, the production of new, or let's say the production of, or re-emergence of a Kosovar society which was dismantled during war, I find it almost impossible, right? Because there's no discussion, there's no dialogue, there's no conflict. The space is somehow maintained sterile from the political. And I think this intervention in many ways, because also with the imagery that he uses, creates more space. Anyway, so if he would just reinstate the Kosovar flag, he would remain within the existing system. But he doesn't. In a way, in my view, he introduces this counter-hegemony which can include more discussions, but how much this is relevant for the given context. This is also maybe important, and to add to your answer. I had an opportunity to visit Palestine for a conference a few years ago. Basically, I received an invitation from Stanford University, and I thought this is something that I cannot refuse. But I was aware. So this is maybe very important to be politically aware of the situation. I went through a war situation. I knew more or less what a war situation is, even though I was younger at that time. I knew that I could end up in a real conflict. I could be killed. I even said goodbye to my parents and to everyone. I thought maybe I will not return, because I thought this is being politically aware. But I saw a lot of artists, theoreticians who go there and they think it's like interesting, you know. And the fact was that there you can see the real function of art, I think, in that, or I could see the real function of art, but also I could reflect on the function of art in our context when we were occupied. And I struggled to understand it, this uncanny, this feeling that I was carrying through those few days. I mean, for instance, we were in a conference like this, and we were hearing protests outside, and someone says, well, there are protests because they shot 5 or 3 Palestinians nearby. And then you would think, what are we doing? You know, what is this? Art in those situations, I think, if used as we use them in another situation, can only normalize those situations. And this is something that I struggled with during that visit. And then I went back to our situation, and I thought, actually, the so-called art of resistance during occupation was us trying to normalize our lives and political reality. So the strategy and how, and there are theoreticians who write about this a lot, what strategy, what means, and strategy is always very important, not to fall into this situation. I did an artwork after I visited Palestine, and it's maybe still relevant for our time. At that time, I think, I'm not sure with facts, but a part right now, part of the wall which separates citizens, Palestinians, Israelis in Palestine and Israel was blown up, and it enabled communication on the flow of goods between Egypt and Gaza Strip at that time. And I thought this is the only artwork in that time, basically. So I thought any other work on that wall is not an artwork, actually. So it normalizes that condition. It gives meaning to that existence, and that existence is real. So I thought just by the rupture, creating that rupture, that is what art can do in those extreme situations, actually. So we are going outside of the ontological existence into an ontic conflict when you create these situations. And maybe that's a vague answer. So we are not here in those realities. We can still exercise for a future conflict and think for a future conflict, but there are some other European citizens who are in those situations right now. And that's why I think more we exercise, it could be more meaningful.
There was a last question, so we are a little bit late.
I'd like to just ask one question about the flag. So he used the flag of football and offside. So it means in football always 2 teams, of course. So for me, I felt kind of a little nationalism, because when we talk about antagonism, in that case against Greater Albanian, historically, and the population also, almost all people in Kosovo is Albanian. So Yeah, in this history, the Albania and Kosovo, I could understand. But how say, in like small village, Mitrovica, it's a North village, North town in Kosovo. There's also many Serbian people, and I guess always small conflicts over there. And I just thought for artist, for him or maybe Albanian people in Kosovo, the problem with conflict with Serbia is almost over, almost finished, and just they think about the conflicts with other country, and he used the flag of offside in football, or maybe replace not the flag of Kosovo using the football. He could also think about the conflicts inside that country, inside the minority and majority. What do you think about that?
It's first of all, I feel that the imagery that he used is inclusive. So it's not exclusive. The Albanian flag used in this context is exclusive. The Serbian flag used in this context is exclusive. So it excludes the others, being that a majority or a minority. So when the Serbian flag used in some other parts of Kosovo, in that context is exclusive. So it just pushes out other people. In the contrary, when he uses the football flag, right? And football is an interesting appearance to be discussed, but the flag itself means the same for those who watch football in the north of Kosovo and those who watch football in the south of Kosovo. So in this way, it doesn't have that necessary problem. At the same time, the context in the northern part of Kosovo is very interesting in the given situation, but I must say for other reasons in many ways. It has been compared to what is happening with the invasion in Ukraine, because that area is a borderline with Serbia. Similarly, like Donbass is a borderline in Ukraine bordering with Russia. So some politicians have used it, and also Russian politicians have used it. It is a small area in terms of size. It has some 40,000 inhabitants, so 40,000, a medium-sized football pitch, basically. But similar ideologies. So again, ethnic lines, dividing nations based on ethnicity, and you could see this discourse operating or resurfacing now as an alibi in the Russian invasion. But there are different developments in the north which very often are not represented outside of the country, and you constantly create the idea that the crisis there is with many real conflicts appearing all the time. For instance, if you go on the official websites of the British government, no one is advised to even visit the northern part, and you create this idea that it's completely not possible to visit that part. In reality, there are interesting tendencies in the north. There are interesting developments in the north. There are liminal movements in the north, crossings from a more stabilized social realities, which one side or the other would like to maintain, but the art context, in many ways, was not always powerful enough to communicate with those situations. And there were real obstacles as well. So a few years back, before 2013, it was not safe for someone from the Albanian ethnic community to visit the north. I myself, I didn't travel before that time in the north. The lack of information was one reason, but there are still young people from that side of Kosovo, from that part of Kosovo, which don't visit the other for the same reasons: lack of information, lack of communication, and that side of Kosovo is more or less has remained a leftover of Yugoslav wars, in a way, when you analyze it more thoroughly. There were some artist interventions in that area, which I explore in my study, and but they were always very carefully done, in a way. You know, being aware where you go politically and how you intervene in that context is always very, very important, as I think in any other context, because other researchers, and I had the opportunity to observe other research during this time, very rarely are able to reveal the context properly. And I think this is also where the art field has some capacity. I'm not saying like all the capacity, some capacity to be more sensitive in a given situations.
So Albert, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we will switch over to the film of Kader Attiad, Reflecting Memory, quickly, because we are quite late. We will come back on Kader Attiad with your intervention, Chiara, at 2 o'clock. So I will let the floor to the film. Est-ce que je dois faire quelque chose ici?